Here on the Colour of Country Life, good to be speaking with Shadow Treasurer Daniel Mookhey on Budget Day. How are you going, Daniel?
Good, Ricky. How are you?
Not bad at all, thanks. Look, there's a lot of big promises in this state budget, which will be an election budget. What's your overarching comment about what you're hearing so far from the Perrottet government?
Well, I think the basic way to summarise this budget is that a government that has been in office for 12 years is throwing money at problems they've ignored for over a decade. The Premier has promised $42 billion of new spending. And to put that into context, that is more than Scott Morrison and Anthony Albanese promised at the federal election combined. What Premier Perrottet has not explained is where precisely is he getting the money to pay for this lavish spending. Equally, had Premier Perrottet listened to the community about the amount of pressure the health system was under, the amount of pressure our school system was under 5 years ago, then he wouldn't have to be shoveling so much more money out the door to catch up for his 12-year-old government's incompetence when it comes to delivering basic services for the people of New South Wales.
When you look at all of that spending, you've got to question whether there's going to be some taxes coming along to pay for that. Has the government pledged there'll be no new taxes, or are we seeing a cunning move onto land tax instead of stamp duty?
Not only have they not pledged no new taxes, they are increasing taxes in this budget as well. Mr. Perrottet wants to introduce a land tax on every family home in New South Wales that lasts forever. Equally, payroll tax will go up from 1 July. Other taxes are also set to rise. And our basic point here is that at a time where interest rates are skyrocketing, electricity prices are soaring, tolls are set to climb again, petrol prices are through the roof, we don't see how a working family in New South Wales will find the money to pay Mr. Perrottet more taxes, and we can't see how they will have the thousands of dollars they'll need each year to pay him a land tax.
Now, when you say, I think, is the promise the government's making is that it's for new home buyers that they would have the option of paying this land tax, or is the devil in the detail that effectively every household's eventually going to pay land tax?
Well, Mr. Perrottet has been clear and upfront with the people of New South Wales, which is he wants a broad-based land tax on every family home in this state. And I believe him when he says that if he gets re-elected, that is the policy he will pursue. What he hasn't outlined is where exactly is he getting the money to plug the hole this transition will create in the budget? Because to be very clear here, families will have to pay more under Mr. Perrottet's land tax model, but the state will collect less in revenue. And at the same time that families are going to have to tighten their belts to find the money to pay him a land tax, then the state government is also going to have to tighten its belt to fund the transition. Because right now, there is no additional federal support coming from the Commonwealth government. The Commonwealth government has its own budget challenges. And in the circumstances where families are going to have to fork out more money and the state will have to fund the transition itself, that's only going to put more pressure on frontline services because there'll be less money to put into our hospitals and into our schools and into our police forces.
Now, speaking of frontline services, just lastly, you mentioned hospitals. The government's made some commitments on the rural health front, but has it committed enough? Do we need more spent to improve the public perception about the adequacy of health services, especially in regional areas?
It's a really important question that you're asking there, Ricky, and it perhaps makes the point better than anything else, because the government has ignored the crisis that has inflicted our rural and regional hospitals for more than a decade now. And only now that it's come to such light is the government throwing money at fixing this particular problem. The government's had 12 years to get our rural and regional hospitals up to scratch. And I would expect, as would every other person in New South Wales, is that your ability to access first-class world standard healthcare shouldn't depend on your postcode. A person who lives in Broken Hill is as entitled to first-rate healthcare as a person who lives in Barara, and that hasn't been delivered by Mr. Perrottet. He's had 12 years. He's asking for 4 more.
Well, Daniel Mookhey, thanks for joining us today on Budget Day. We look forward to the opposition's budget reply and what you've got to say in competition of the government going into the next state election.
Thank you for having me.